Let's start by just pausing here and zooming out 30,000 feet while the rest of the commentariat basically is obsessing over minor details of the stage managing at the DNC. What happened last night is the sitting president of the United States, the leader of the free world, taking the stage well after 11 p.m. East Coast time. He is looking feeble. He was slurring his words. Honestly, I think this is the worst that I've ever seen him look physically, and this is for a primetime, or what was supposed to be a primetime address at the Democratic National Convention. And he talked for a long time, but then he left. He's off to vacation in Santa Barbara for the rest of the week. Now, that's while the convention for the party that he's ostensibly the leader of is going on in Chicago. They put the president on day one. He went on after 11 p.m., and that's really, I think, going to be the theme of the week and probably the theme of the rest of the campaign. They want to get Biden out of the way, and they want to move on. They want Kamala Harris to have to deal with as little of Joe Biden as she possibly can. Now, do I think they intentionally pushed Biden to 11 p.m.? That was the scuttlebutt here in Chicago as he was approaching his speech time. It was going on. They ended up cutting a couple of guests, which is why I think actually there was no grand conspiracy to push Biden really late into the night. I think they're just running an extremely mediocre convention so far. You can see here they cut James Taylor even. They even cut James Taylor to get to Joe Biden just a little bit quicker. They probably cut 10 minutes worth of different speakers, including former DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. But even so, maybe 10 to 15 minutes earlier is when they would get to Biden after cutting all of that. And it didn't stop some Biden aides from complaining to the press either. Here's what Alex Thompson reported that one Biden aide told him. They weren't happy about the event dragging on and on. I don't think that it was a grand conspiracy, but even so, on Biden's night, Democrats actually started by surprising the audience here with an introduction from, of all people, Kamala Harris. Remember, this is supposed to be Joe Biden's night. Now, Kamala Harris began her introductory remarks, which were very brief, by mentioning Joe Biden. She got a rapturous applause. It was electric, but here's how Kamala Harris began her brief introduction at the DNC on night one.
And I want to kick us off by celebrating our incredible president, Joe Biden, who will be speaking later tonight. Joe, thank you for your historic leadership, for your lifetime of service to our nation, and for all you will continue to do. We are forever grateful to you.
Right, so she started by talking about Joe Biden, and then came Hillary Clinton, who talked about Biden bringing back, quote, dignity and decency to the White House. First of all, not sure that a Clinton has the credibility to talk about bringing dignity and decency back to the White House, but let's put that aside. Just a couple of hours later, Biden had shown how profoundly undignified and indecent this awful charade is.
He brought dignity, decency, and competence back to the White House.
Dignity and decency might be the two worst words, I really mean that, to describe what's happening on the stage and what's happening in the White House right now, as a man who honestly could not get through a debate with his opponent without stumbling through every answer, is now at the helm of the free world, as I mentioned earlier. He has been forced out through an internal party coup after receiving all of the votes of millions of people around the country after he flubbed a debate. Not super democratic, not super decent, certainly anything but dignified. And it was predictably dignity, decency, and democracy, all of that. Democracy, though, was a huge theme of the night. Anyone would have expected that. It's been a huge theme of both Biden's campaign and Harris's nascent campaign so far. We heard a lot about it from speakers on the stage here at the DNC. Now, take the speech from Michigan Democratic Senator Mallory McMorrow. Early in the evening, she said that Republicans, because of Project 2025, might weaponize the DOJ if Trump gets back into power.
But what it means is that under Project 2025, Donald Trump would be able to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after his political opponents. He could even turn the FBI into his own personal police force.
So this is obviously amusing given the abundant evidence of Obama-era DOJ involvement in the Russian collusion conspiracy theory. That's something that gets overlooked a lot, but it's obviously amusing in the context of what happened with all of that. And meanwhile, I have to play this particular clip because it's so good. You can see here that chants of "lock him up" broke out during Hillary Clinton's speech, and she responded with, I guess, a smile. Take a look at Clinton reacting to the "lock him up" chants that broke out during the DNC on night one here. I also want to point out this excellent perspective from Daniel Marins of HuffPost, who noted that when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took the stage, she was welcomed with chants of her name. This is somebody who was a party outsider, somebody who's a democratic socialist. And I want to put Marin's point side by side with this fantastic point from Zed Jalani, who said, quote, the DNC platform starting with a land acknowledgement and then including a, quote, ironclad commitment to providing Israel with weapons no matter what is basically the Democratic Party summarized in one document. I think that's a really interesting point. And want to just table it for a second because there's additional context that I think makes it even more interesting. Kamala Harris proposed a 28% corporate tax on the first night of the convention as well. So a 28% corporate tax. And I should add, she did that after the Washington Post editorial board and many other economic observers absolutely panned her economic policy proposal rollout that happened just days before the convention. A lot of people said that it was tantamount or it was necessarily going to involve price controls in a sort of Nixonian sense, although left populists in the Democratic Party, the types of people who don't often laud Kamala Harris, actually did laud Kamala Harris and did read something really positive into the economic policy rollout that Kamala Harris went ahead with just days before the DNC. So I think the point that's worth taking away from all of that is Democrats are feeling really confident, or I should say the Harris campaign is feeling really confident. And honestly, why shouldn't they be? They have taken the most unpopular vice president in recent American history and turned her into somebody who's running neck and neck with a man who had months and months of time to put together a campaign. And she's stepping into this in a couple of weeks and, in certain states and certain battleground states is running, again, neck and neck. So let's take a look at how I think some of this has Democrats not just feeling so boosted by post-Biden momentum that they're leaning into populism, but also into identity politics, which I think is something they're very hesitant to do after Hillary Clinton in 2016. Maybe they put Hillary Clinton on Monday night, the first night of the convention, so they can do something similar with her, have a splashy debut, but then not have to deal with Hillary Clinton as momentum and energy builds later into the week. Hillary Clinton gave a speech that involved a whole lot of talk about being a woman. She talked a lot about Shirley Chisholm. She talked a lot about Geraldine Ferraro. She talked about a future where there are no ceilings on our dreams. After she lost, she said Democrats, quote, refused to give up on America. And this is one of the most interesting parts, I thought, in her speech. She said, the future is here. Together, we put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling.
I see the freedom to look our children in the eye and say, in America, you can go as far as your hard work and talent will take you, and mean it. And you know what? On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
So that might sound like cope. It might sound like Hillary Clinton finally getting an opportunity to say, my candidacy was incredibly valuable because if Kamala Harris is elected the first woman president, she wouldn't be here without me. That's the implication of the argument we're hearing from Hillary Clinton. And that's really interesting. I think it's something we haven't quite heard from Hillary Clinton yet. She seemed lighter and more excited because perhaps that great humiliation of 2016 can actually be reframed as a step towards something that nobody thought could happen in the near future. After her debate, it felt, like we had reverted to so many people, or after her loss in 2016, it felt like we had reverted to so many people. We had 4 years of Trump, and then Joe Biden comes back and is a fairly unpopular president. And now what you're potentially getting is the first woman president, the first Black woman president. And so you could sort of sense in Hillary Clinton that there was a new opportunity for her to reframe the trajectory of her own career and her own mark on American history. And the crowd responded really positively to all of that. And then came Joe Biden. Joe Biden, after Hillary Clinton, after Andy Bashir, after what was a very, I think, politically powerful, persuasive, I say this as somebody who is very anti-abortion, but a politically very powerful series of speeches from people who had been affected by anti-abortion laws in recent years. Governor Andy Bashir spoke about that because one of them was from his own state. Raphael Warnock gave a speech where he invoked the Bible to rapturous applause. It just sort of went down the list of Democratic heavyweights. Dr. Jill Biden gave a speech about, just standard first lady love for her husband, love for the president. And then Ashley Biden actually introduced her father, and Joe Biden came out, hugged his daughter. We don't hear a lot from Ashley Biden. We obviously didn't hear from Hunter Biden, but allowing the family to kind of give Joe Biden a send-off, it's really what it felt like. Biden comes out, he's looking feeble. I think this is, again, the worst that I've seen him look physically. And he talked about sort of a lot of the notes he hits in many of these speeches about how he saw men coming out of the woods with torches in Charlottesville, and that's what motivated him to get back in the race, with those last wishes of Beau Biden heavily weighing on his mind. And it kind of built up to this moment where he didn't address in detail the decision process of stepping down from the ticket. He spoke about it pretty vaguely, but he said, I love my job, but I love my country more. Let's take a listen to what it looked like in the arena when Joe Biden made that statement.
I've got 5 months left in my presidency. I've got a lot to do. I intend to get it done. It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more.
Joe Biden finished so late at night that I feel like he probably had lost the country's attention. Again, I'm not saying that was any grand conspiracy. I don't think it was. I think this has been a fairly poorly managed convention. You've seen reporters say, it was much better at the RNC. I thought the RNC was pretty well managed, but it also had its own problems on day one. So maybe things will get better. That's to be determined. But Democrats are really, really confident. That is abundantly clear. It could steer them to flirt with some strategies and some lines that aren't effective. But Kamala Harris has incredible momentum, both in the media and in polls. Not that those things are entirely disconnected, but she has incredible momentum going into the convention. I think there's a question of whether it sticks around after Labor Day. She had incredible momentum in her 2019 Democratic primary. But I think this week it is going to be Democrats continuing to float on air. I think it's possible some of these protests build into something bigger than they are right now. I'm not ruling that out. We'll speak to protesters later in the show, and you can make your own judgment up in the audience. But as of right now, it feels like this is going to be a successful week for Democrats that gives them an extra boost, extending the sugar high to at least Labor Day for Kamala Harris. And, after Labor Day, that bubble can get punctured really quickly. It's very unpredictable, but the sugar high is going to continue, and that really allows Kamala Harris to establish herself in the minds of voters, while Republicans, now faced with a new candidate, are flailing around a little bit to figure out what is going to stick. I'm not saying there isn't something that can stick in the minds of voters, especially if you have the Washington Post editorial board slamming your economic rollout of all, the possible critics. In the media, it's very rare to see something like that when, you have major Democratic media figures like Michael McCall saying, she shouldn't even do interviews. There's still a long way to go until the election, but right now Kamala Harris is becoming a new person in the eyes of some voters. This week will help her do that, but she's already been doing it for a matter of weeks now, obviously thanks to some really positive love from the media. But that's what I think is going to happen this week so far. But obviously we'll be following it really closely.